Why care about this now? Because NASA is not just talking about science missions. It is setting a timetable, a structure, and a political frame for you. S. Power in space. In the announcement, NASA says it wants to return to the moon before the end of President Trump's term. Build a moon base and keep an enduring presence there. It also says success or failure will be measured in months, not years. That kind of language matters in Beijing as much as it does in Washington. China has its own lunar goals, its own industrial planning, and its own view of strategic competition. So this is not simply an American budget story. It is a signal about tempo. It tells us how the United States wants to organize its next phase in space, and it gives China a clearer picture of the competition it may face. The core of the announcement is a shift toward a phased lunar architecture. NASA says Artemis III, scheduled for 2027, will focus on testing integrated systems and operations in Earth orbit ahead of the Artemis IV lunar landing. After that, it wants more frequent crewed lunar missions, first aiming for landings every 6 months, using more commercially procured and reusable hardware. NASA also says it will pause Gateway in its current form and put more attention on infrastructure that supports surface operations. Then, it describes a 3-phase moon-based plan: first build and learn with payload deliveries, rovers, and technology demonstrations. Then establish early infrastructure for recurring astronaut activity. And finally move toward long-duration human presence with heavier cargo and partner contributions. In simple terms, NASA is trying to move from rare showcase missions to a more repeatable operating system on the moon. Here is the central tension. NASA is promising sustained presence, but much of this still depends on systems that are not yet proven at the needed scale and cadence. The agency talks about reusable hardware, frequent crewed missions, and a permanent lunar foothold. It also wants to preserve U.S. presence in low Earth orbit while the International Space Station ages out and commercial stations mature. That is a lot to do at once. The announcement does show a clearer logic than a one-off mission plan. But logic is not the same thing as execution. For China, that gap matters. Beijing does not need to match every NASA press release. It needs to judge whether the United States can really sustain the launch rate, industrial coordination, and budget discipline behind this architecture. So the competition is not only about who lands first. It is about who can turn a plan into routine capability. For China, the announcement sharpens several questions. First, it raises the value of speed. If NASA really aims for a regular landing rhythm in the phased base, China may feel pressure to show steady milestones of its own. Second, it highlights industrial organization. NAS's language leans hard on commercial procurement, reusable systems, and partner contributions. China uses a different institutional model, but it faces the same basic test: can it support repeat operations, not just symbolic missions? Third, it changes the diplomatic picture. NASA is framing the moon as a place for sustained presence with international participation. That matters because coalitions shape standards, access, logistics, and legitimacy. From a China perspective, this is not just a technical race. It is a contest over who sets the operating pattern for CIS lunar space. And once those patterns are established, they can become hard to dislodge. The next thing to watch is not rhetoric. It is follow through. NASA's requests for information and draft requests for proposals are coming. Those documents will show how serious the shift really is. Watch for whether Gateway's pause becomes a durable reallocation towards surface systems, whether commercial providers are given a workable role in recurring lunar missions, and whether the low Earth orbit transition avoids a gap after the space station era. For China watchers, the key is comparative momentum. Are U.S. plans becoming more concrete month by month? Are Chinese timelines adjusting in response? Are new partnerships forming around transport, habitats, surface mobility, and science access? This episode's takeaway is simple. NASA's National Space Policy announcement does not settle the moon race, but it does make the strategic question clearer: which system can build presence that lasts, not just missions that impress?